Hello and welcome to this video and to July's book review and to a sneaky preview of our new flat because we moved and we've been living here for about a week when I'm filming this one, but as you know with my content it's all backdated, so you will get to the whole moving vlogs in a couple of weeks time, but just the way everything is means that the book review I have to film here in a non-bookish spot and without any books really to show you because they're all in storage pretty much. So I wasn't sure how July's reading was going to go because of all the moving and things like that, but we did pretty well. Read 5 books despite everything that's going on, and I ended up having a little theme of, I guess, Booktube favourites or thereabouts. I guess we get on into it, but first of all, this is now where my books are kept. So for the next however many months, you won't see any books in these videos other than the ones I flash up because they're all in that box or in our storage. But anyway, you don't really care about that, you want to know what books I read and what I thought of them. So the first book I read was Daisy Jones and the Six by Jenkins Reid. So I read The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I think in April. I'll link the video up here where I talk about that one. And I did enjoy it, but not as much as everyone else. So going into Daisy Jones, I was a little bit apprehensive, I guess. I liked the idea of this book. If you don't know, this one follows Daisy Jones and the band The Six, who are big in the late 60s, early 70s, if I remember rightly. And it goes through their rise and then their breakup. And it's told through interviews, which I found really interesting. I actually much preferred this book to Evelyn Hugo, which again is a bit of a controversial opinion. I know Evelyn Hugo is most people's favourite, but I much preferred Daisy Jones. I found it a really quick read because of the interview style that it's in, and I just thought it was really clever how you genuinely started to think it was a real band. Like, I knew it was fictional, but I really wanted to search the music and find out about Daisy Jones and the Six and all of this, and like just really dive into that world, but obviously it's fictional so I couldn't do it. I understand they're doing a TV show of it, so it'll be interesting to see what they make of the music, and I'll be keen to hear, I guess, that album, the album that's in the book done by the TV people. Does that all make sense? So that'll be interesting. I think that comes out later this year, so I'm very excited about that. As I said, it's all told through interviews, like many years later after their split and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed the nuances of people's opinions and the differing opinions of the same event from each person and their perspective. I thought that was something really intriguing and so human, basically. But in that there was sometimes a bit of confusion about whose version I was reading from ish, more so about the relationships between the people. So they would be talking about X person and I would be like, I can't remember how that's related to this. So that would probably be my only downside of it, is that sometimes it got a little bit confusing. And the characters aren't actually that likeable, but that's what I found enjoyable about this book. You sort of disliked them all, but you were also rooting for them. For me, and I've only read 2, but if you were going to read any Jenkins Reid book and you could only read one, I would definitely pick Daisy Jones and the Six. So from there I went on to another author that is like blown up on the Booktube, Books.net world, and that's Colleen Hoover. So I read Verity. This follows an slightly unknown author who is selected to finish off a very famous crime series by a writer called Verity, who has had an accident and can no longer do it. The public don't know about the accident, they just know this person's being brought in to help finish the series, and circumstances mean that this new writer has to live with Verity and her family for a period of time. And it is billed as a thrillery romance, this book, which is why it intrigued me. And it was definitely a very eerie book. I don't think I've read any, if many, books that have made me feel quite so tense, I guess, throughout the reading experience. Like I knew something was coming, but I couldn't work out what it was going to be or when it was going to come, but I knew it was going to come. And it has a very unexpected start, this book. You are very much thrown in at the deep end, and there is high intrigue straight from the start of it. However, I just didn't really connect very well with any of the characters in it. I do think it's a very well written book, and it was a very interesting concept, but there was something missing for me, and I can't really put my finger on what it was. But for that, I couldn't give it the 5 stars that I know other people have, and I wish I could tell you what I felt was missing, but I still can't put my finger on it, and I've thought about it for a while. So definitely a very different book to the ones I've read before. As I said, it is very atmospheric, and that was a very enjoyable part of it. And I am intrigued to read more of Colleen Hoover's work, particularly some of her more romance-led or dodgy romance-led stuff. I know, what was the one that everybody likes at the moment? It Ends With Us, is that the book? The one with the pink flowers. So I am intrigued to give her writing a go, because I do think it was well written, but as I say, something was missing. So the third book that I went on to was on my Kindle, in fact, and I read The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I hope I'm pronouncing his surname correctly. So this is another thriller. I obviously had a thing at that stage for a thriller, and it follows is he a psychologist, a psychoanalyst, somebody like that, as he's working in a prison with a patient who has been committed for killing her husband but hasn't spoken since, so he's trying to get her to talk. She is the silent patient, basically. And this is another book that I wasn't really sure how I felt about it. Again, I think it was well written, and it was very easy to follow and easy to read, and there were definitely certain twists that probably saved it for me, but I didn't find it very thrilling for a thriller. I think that was my problem with it. I actually found it a little bit dull in patches. And again, I just wasn't keen on the characters, so I didn't feel any connection to them or any care of what they were actually doing or whether she spoke and that kind of thing. Which was a shame, because the premise of the book sounds really interesting, but it was just not, I didn't connect with it. Now, with all of these books, I don't know whether the fact that there was high stress with trying to sell our flat, move, not being able to because we hadn't exchanged, and there was a lot of pressure at that point. I don't know whether that has impacted my reading and how I've taken in some of the stories, but certainly there are a couple this month that didn't quite hit the mark for me, and The Silent Patient was one of those. I understand there's another book by him, I think, called The Maidens, which I may or may not pick up, but as I say, I did find that The Silent Patient did have some sort of pacing issues, and there were definitely moments where I was getting a bit bored, which I don't think you should get bored in a thriller. So again, not my favourite of the month, but still had its enjoyable moments to it. So that was The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. This is the only one that I can actually hold up. So the next one I read was a romance, and that was It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. This follows Piper, who is a socialite basically in LA, who then gets cut off by her stepfather after a incident and is sent to live in the small fishing town that her father came from, where she ends up meeting Brendan, who's like this grumpy fisherman, and romance ensues. Although, as I said, the time I was reading it, I did find it difficult to sit and just read it. I did have to do it in smaller chunks than I normally would, but this is probably the book with the best written smut scenes, shall we say, smutty writing in it that I've read in a long time. It does say on the back here that Tessa Bailey is back with a Schitt's Creek inspired rom-com, and you can definitely see the Schitt's Creek influence on it. Schitt's Creek, if you don't know, is a sitcom, and Piper and Alexis in Schitt's Creek are very similar characters. So, and I like that programme, so it wasn't a problem for me. I found it quite enjoyable, in fact. But I found that this one had a lot of relationships that I got on board with. This actually had characters that I connected with, which was nice. I really liked the relationship between Piper and her sister, but her and Brendan I think were a bit too insta-love for me, so their actual romance probably wasn't my favourite part, but it was a good driving force for the story. I think the reason why their relationship wasn't my favourite is because there were parts that really irritated me, like she'd call him her recharging station, so she'd want a hug and be like, can I come into my recharging station, and that didn't sit very well with me. I got a bit fed up with that. So although it took me a while to read it, to be fair, it is quite a chunky book. I think it was a good one to pick up at the time because it's a beach read essentially. There's nothing too serious in it, or you just get lost in the fishing village and life there, and then come back into your own life without having any hangover from it, which I appreciated, and I did enjoy reading it. And I believe we've now got Hook, Line and Sinker, which follows her sister, whose name has escaped me. Is it Hannah? It is Hannah. There we go. So it follows a relationship between Hannah and I believe one of the other fishermen. So again, if I see that cheap somewhere, I probably will pick it up because I did enjoy it. I read some of the little snippets because it turns out Tessa Bailey's written hundreds of books. So in the back there was these little snippets of her other work, and there were some there that did intrigue me. So that was It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. And then the last book that I literally finished this morning was Born a Crime. I think there's a whole other title like in brackets after that, but I don't know what that is off the top of my head. And that's by Trevor Noah. This is a memoir of Trevor Noah's life in South Africa as a coloured boy. That is the terminology he uses. So he has a black mother and a white father, and a lot of what he was writing about was firstly living in apartheid as a coloured child. That's why the book's called Born a Crime, because it was a criminal act for a black man or woman to have any relations with a white man or woman. So for him to have a parent of each means that he's technically illegal because it shouldn't have happened. So it was interesting to read about all of the apartheid things. It's not something I've ever studied or anything like that, so I know the basics of it, but I don't know a lot of the details, so it was interesting to see more of that, or to read more of that I should say, and also to read about Trevor's experience and not fitting in, because he didn't really associate as a white man, or he did associate as a black man, but he wasn't always accepted into that community because he was of a lighter skin colour basically. So that was all very interesting. I find it hard to rate or judge a memoir because it's somebody's life, but because I didn't know who Trevor Noah was going into this book, I read it and I had it on my Kindle largely because whenever I do list challenges it always comes up, so I've always been intrigued, and you know, as another one to tick off on a list challenge. But I didn't actually have any idea who Trevor Noah was. I had to Google who he was before I started the book just to, you know, get an idea of what I'm getting myself into. Because of that, I struggled a bit to find that, you know, common ground. I find with memoirs, or I'm finding frequently with memoirs, if I know of the person more, so like when I read the Anna Kendrick one for instance, I've seen a lot of Anna Kendrick's work, I've watched a few interviews and stuff with her. I feel she is a person I am more aware of than say Trevor Noah, who I literally had to Google who he was before I started his book. I find that when I have more of a grasp of who they are, I enjoy their story more because I can picture it as the person that I have seen portrayed on the screen and things like that. So I struggled a bit there with the disconnect of having no idea who he was, but also reading this story that was interesting, don't get me wrong, it's very interesting look at stuff, and at times there are definite trigger warnings in this for domestic violence and things like that, but there was a disconnect because I couldn't really tie in the two together, if that makes sense. So we would definitely recommend it because it was an interesting read. Maybe do a bit of Trevor Noah research beforehand, I don't know, maybe it's just me. So there you go. There are the 5 books that I read in July. August, who knows what's going to happen. I'm going to be here. We might have a different filming background. I sort of just grabbed wherever I thought might be suitable. And as a little sneak peek, you're going to be seeing a lot of this series because my plan is to read that in August. So as I said at the beginning, the moving vlogs are coming up, so this setup will all make sense soon. So if you're interested in all of that kind of stuff, click that subscribe button. But if you liked this video, please go and give it a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!